it's hard to commit suicide in solitary confinement because they take everything away. You go in there and you have nothing but boxers, a towel, a blanket, and books. That's it. And so they put me in there, and I knew that they designed it to where you can't commit suicide because so many people have in the past. So I planned it, and I was like, okay, well, there's an opportunity. Once a week, they let you shave, and then they give you a razor, and they're supposed to watch you. But in this particular place, the guard wasn't really watching. So I was going to just take the razor in my life. And I remember like a day before I was going to go do that, a chaplain came down to solitary confinement. And chaplain, nobody comes down to solitary confinement except for like medical people and the COs. The correctional officers, but he came down to solitary confinement and he was walking by cells and giving out Bibles. And he walked up to my cell and he called me over and he gave me a Bible and he talked to me and he encouraged me to not give up. He knew something was wrong. He knew I was going through something. I became vulnerable to him, and he told me exactly what I needed to hear to get me through one more day. And then he gave me a mission. He told me to figure out ultimately what my purpose was, because I had one and nobody had ever told me that before. And so I listened to him and I picked up the Bible and I opened it and I started reading, and that got me through the week. And then I became obsessed with trying to figure out how I got to that point in my life, from a kid who played baseball and went to Catholic school to running away into the streets and ending up in prison in solitary. And so I became obsessed with figuring that out. And every day I studied and I read and I started to work on myself. And in that process, I transformed my life. And I read 150 books in 3 years, and I educated myself, and I got out of solitary confinement and I went back to general population.
Welcome to the Leading with Vulnerability podcast. I'm your host, Yuma Barnett. You guys are all very familiar with me. And today I have what I would say is a unique guest, a different guest than what we have had on the podcast, previously and in the past. But I think some stories and some parallels to what my guest, Carlos Vasquez, has gone through in his life and what he's doing now. He's the CEO and founder of How to Battle. He's a motivational speaker, an elite mindset coach, and an author. And he's got a great story, and I'm not going to ruin any of it. We're going to get into it as we go. I'm going to pass it off to Carlos, let him introduce himself, and then we'll get into this conversation. Go ahead, Carlos.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me on. It's an honor to be interviewed by somebody like yourself that's served our country, and so I appreciate that. And I do believe that there's parallels in a sense. And people in the military have had a huge impact on my life since being out, helping me transition. So I'm honored to be here. Thank you. Like you mentioned, I'm the CEO and the founder of How to Battle, which is a coaching and consulting business. We work with everybody from the youth all the way up to corporations, just helping people ultimately become better versions of themselves. So I always like to say I'm in the people business. Just trying to help people become better. And a lot of that comes from me completely transforming my life. And I'm sure we'll get into that more in detail. But, I was homeless at 13. I ran away from home, a toxic home. And I grew up living in the back of a car, abandoned car. At 13, 14, I was addicted to drugs and alcohol and became a gang member. That became my brotherhood. That I would give my life up for that. And basically did, in a sense, because by the time I was 18, I was on my way to prison for 20 years, prison sentence. And I went to prison for armed robbery, multiple armed robberies. I was on the run for a year. U.S. Marshals caught me and took me in. And I remember they told me I'd never be free again. That's what, I was facing life in prison all the way up until trial. And I'm a firm believer in God, and I believe God played a huge role in me having the opportunity to take a deal for 20 years with 2 strikes. And back then I didn't see that as a blessing, but today I do, because ultimately that's 17 years out of the 20 that I served created a man in me that is just passionate every single day to go out there and help people. And so that's my story in a nutshell. And there's so much more in there. But I'm going to let you kind of lead which specifics you want to know, because there's a lot.
Yeah, you're right. That is probably the definition of in a nutshell. I'm sure the listeners and myself probably have a lot of questions, and we'll get to as many of those as we can. So we're going to kick it off with the question I ask everybody that comes on the Leading with Vulnerability podcast, right? And I'm sure you have been in some vulnerable moments and situations in your life. So I'd be curious to know, what is your definition of vulnerability?
Yeah, that's a good question, because when I was in prison, in order for me to start the transformation process, I had to become vulnerable. And later on, when I started formulating my first coaching sessions in prison, that was one of the requirements of every man in there, was to become vulnerable. And in a place like prison, where most of these guys are serving life, because I was on maximum security prisons my whole time. I mean, you walk in the room and you have guys sitting in a circle in there for murder, all kind of, crimes, but they want to change, and they want different, because most of them had committed their crimes when they were juveniles, or before the age of 25. And so I knew that in order to change, we had to be vulnerable. We had to open up. So for me, vulnerability is about being able to humble yourself and ask for help, ask for guidance, right? People look at vulnerability sometimes as a weakness. I don't think it is. I think it's the complete opposite. I think that it's not about, being like acting like you're helpless. It's more so seeking help because you're trying to improve and become a better version of yourself. So for me, I always look at it as a strength. Yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And we're going to dig into that a little bit more, because I'm curious about how vulnerability itself ties into being in prison. But you have a hell of a tagline. From convict to CEO. You don't hear that a lot. You don't see that a lot. So let's dig into your prison time a little bit more, and just learn about it. You went at 18, right? So if I think back to when I was 18, I was, a hard-headed, pain in the ass 18-year-old that thought I knew everything, right? And just fresh in the military. So at what point, you go to prison for what they say might be the rest of your life? Did you have that moment where, like, I got to get my shit together if I'm ever gonna, make something of myself? When does that happen when you're in an environment like that?
Yeah. So I remember I was 18 years old. I was sitting in court, and I was getting ready to go to trial to face life in prison, because of my gang enhancement. Gang affiliations is an automatic life sentence in California. So I remember sitting in court, and the district attorney came up to me, and he offered me a deal for 20 years with 2 strikes, which back in the early 2000s was like 2 strikes was like you're pretty much going in with a life sentence, because one more thing you do, you're going to spend the rest of your life in prison. And so I remember looking at he put the paper on the desk, and he told me I had to make a decision right then and there. I didn't have no time to think. And I remember looking behind me, and there was nobody there. I was just alone. I had no family there. I had no friends, no supporters. And so I remember looking behind me, and I was like, what do I have to live for? Like, let me just take this. Who cares? That was my mindset. I was just done fighting. I was done, like, every day going to court, being told you're going to spend the rest. I just wanted to just get it on with whatever was destined for me. Let's go. So I took the deal. And I remember when shortly after I caught the bus to prison, and I got into prison, and I got off the bus, and a guy told me, he's like, look, you're coming in, you're young, you have a lot of time. Don't expect to ever go home. Just come in here and earn your bones. Like, first opportunity comes up, sign up, meaning you have to go stab somebody, or you have to go hurt somebody, because that's the way you prove yourself in prison, so that people don't take advantage of you. So I went in with that mindset. And so I went in with a suicidal mindset. I went in with the mindset that I didn't care about anybody. I didn't care about myself. I didn't care about any life. And that's the way I did my first decade in prison. First 10 years, I was in and out of solitary confinement. I was getting into riots. I got stabbed. And I was completely living a destructive lifestyle. And about a decade in, I remember I went and I got into some trouble because I ended up becoming a shot caller in the prison yard, meaning that when you're a shot caller in prison, you basically have the command. You can have somebody killed. You could do anything because you have the power of people that you represent. So when I got to that point, the institution told me that I was going to be placed in solitary confinement for 3 years, um, because I was a danger to the safety and the security of the prison. So I ended up going to solitary confinement, and I walked back there with 3 years to do. And I went back there, and I remember running into two guys who had been in back there for 20 years in solitary confinement, and they originally went in with only a year or two to do. And they told me that, like, once you're back here, you're never guaranteed to get out because the laws in here are different. You don't have those rights. They don't ever have to let you out. Every year you go to a board and they determine whether you're suitable to go back. And as long as you're cane connected, you'll never go back. You'll never be free. You'll just be here. And so at that point, I just couldn't imagine being in solitary for that long. I got to a point of suicide. I remember, I planned it, and it's hard to commit suicide in solitary confinement because they take everything away. You go in there and you have nothing but um, boxers, a towel, a blanket, and books. That's it. And so they put me in there, and I knew that they designed it to where you can't commit suicide because so many people have in the past. So I planned it, and I was like, okay, well, I'm gonna. There's an opportunity. Once a week, they let you shave, and then they give you a razor, and they're supposed to watch you. But in this particular place, the guard wasn't really watching, so I was gonna just take the razor in my life. And I remember, like, a day before I was gonna go do that, a chaplain came down to solitary confinement. And chaplain, nobody comes down to solitary confinement except for like medical people and the COs, the correction officers. But he came down to solitary confinement, and he was walking by cells and giving out Bibles. And he walked up to my cell, and he called me over, and he gave me a Bible, and he talked to me, and he encouraged me to not give up. He knew something was wrong. He knew I was going through something. I became vulnerable to him, and he told me exactly what I needed to hear to get me through one more day. And then he gave me a mission. He told me to figure out ultimately what my purpose was, because I had one and nobody had ever told me that before. And so I listened to him, and I picked up the Bible and I opened it and I started reading, and that got me through the week. And then I became obsessed with trying to figure out how I got to that point in my life, from a kid who played baseball and went to Catholic school to running away into the streets and ending up in prison in solitary. And so I became obsessed with figuring that out. And every day I studied and I read and I started to work on myself. And in that process, I transformed my life. Um, and I read 150 books in 3 years, and I educated myself, and I got out of solitary confinement, and I went back to general population. And I went back to general population and let everybody know I was no longer part of that destructive lifestyle. And I got stabbed 2 times for that. But, I was in my cell stitching up my wound, because in prison, when you get stabbed, you can't go to medical unless you're dying, because then they're going to want to know who did it. And if you tell, you'll certainly be killed. So I stitched up my wound, and I remember, as painful as it was, it felt good to know that that was it. I was done. And so after that, I went out and I went to the chapel, and I asked if I could use it once a week to formulate my grouping and my coaching programs. And I started there, and I started there, and I got out 4 years later. I was released from prison early. I wasn't supposed to even technically be out right now. I'm still supposed to be in prison right now. They let me out early, and I started How to Battle, and I haven't stopped since. So it's 2.5 years since I've been out.
Uh, wow. That's there's a lot there, right? There's a lot to that we could unpack there. We could probably talk forever. Um, and you covered it briefly when you kind of found out. How long did you end up spending in solitary?
3 years. The
3 years,
3 years.
and it was during that 3 years that you read the 150 books.
Hmm.
Is that right? So,
Yeah.
can you name just a couple of them that you read that had a kind of a profound impact on you?
Yeah, the one that really had a profound impact on me was Man's Search for Meaning by
Yeah.
Viktor Frankl. Reading about him and his experiences of overcoming way worse than what I was going through gave me hope, and it gave me a sense of like power, because I was like, if there's a man out there that has overcome what he overcame and then took that and like now is writing a book to help people, that kind of like gave me, and that's where I wanted to pursue my degree in psychology because of that book. And then another book was New Earth by Eckhart Tolle. It gave me a whole different perspective on like life and being present. And I remember I used to have some of my best days in solitary confinement. As crazy as that sounds, once I became mentally free, I would have really good and just grateful days. That it's almost like I've had better days out there. I mean, in solitary than sometimes out here. Because out here, I'm very grateful for everything. But some days I remember like reflecting back on that feeling in solitary when I was like just so at peace. And
Yeah.
and so that book played a huge part in me discovering that. But yeah, those are a couple books that
Yeah.
amongst them.
Yeah, I definitely recommend that to anybody that's
Yeah.
listening or watching this. Man's Search for Meaning is kind of a life changing book, and we'll put any perceived problems that you have into serious perspective. That is for sure. Highly recommend that. So I want to delve in just a little bit more into. So you're coming out of solitary, you know,
Hmm.
in your mind as a changed man,
Yeah.
but at that time you were solitary, right? But you know you're about to go back into the environment that is not conducive to the person that you want to become.
Hmm.
Um, how difficult was that? I mean, aside from getting stabbed, but to look people in the eye that are saying, "Oh, hey, Carlos is back. You know, it's time to get it on again and do things that you're not supposed to do." How's it? How did you manage that? How scared were you to do that? How vulnerable did you feel? What was that like?
Terms with the potential of getting killed before I even stepped out of solitary confinement, because I knew that that was a big possibility. And so I just made peace. Like I made peace with God. I made peace with myself, and then I made peace with the people out there that I love and in the free world that I loved by writing to
Yeah,
them, letting them know my change, because I didn't write to them saying, "Hey, I'm going to go out and I'll probably get killed." It was like if this was the last letter, the last words they would ever hear from me, that was the letter I wrote, and I wanted them to have that letter. It's like in the letter when they read it, they see it's evident of the changed man. So that's what I did, and then I also did it for myself. I was like, okay, if I could die today, if I get out of solitary and I go back and I get killed, I'm at peace with that, because I was willing to give my life up for a destructive cause. I was willing to give my life up for doing wrong in the world. So I'm definitely willing to give my life up to do the right thing, to make a stand and say, like, I'm going to do the right thing, and I'm taking back ownership of my life, and I'm going to be in control of that, and I'm going to be the CEO of my life. And
yeah,
once I made that commitment, I was okay with whatever happened. So I felt confident and I wasn't afraid. And so I went out there and I did it, and luckily I was able to survive.
yeah. And with that, with the able to survive, was there a moment when you were like, okay, I've made it past that, transition point to where they're going to leave me alone, and they realize that I'm truly on a different path.
Yeah, although I got stabbed, and I was separated myself from that life, and I always knew I was never truly safe and free until I walked out of prison. And so for 4 years after I got out of solitary, there was always like watching my back, always having that thought. But then in that 4 years of it's like I say, like, live your life every day
Yeah,
like a soldier that's going on deployment, because when you're a soldier going on deployment, you make all your affairs right. You tell the people you love them. You do everything you can to make that day the best day. And then you go on and do what you do. And so for me, every day in that 4 years, I did that because I never knew if I was going to get killed, really. And so that made me a better person. It made me live my days 100%. Even if it was just talking to somebody, I gave them 100% of my time and everything that I had to help them every phone call I got to the free world, every visit, I appreciated it so much more. And I never stopped that. Even now, I live that way every day. So in a sense, took 4 years really for me to really truly feel like I was done. I was free. And that's when I walked out of
Yeah.
prison.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So during that time, during that 4 year period that you're turning your life around, you're starting the groups inside prison. Did you start to see a shift of even people that were close to you in there, or people that knew you, that watched you, that said, "How did Carlos find this? How do I?" And come to you to seek their own peace, for you to help guide them to it?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's me living the life I used to live is a huge reason why so many guys in there who were also living that life ended up coming to those groups and ultimately changing. It's because they knew who I was before that. And they knew that, like, if he can do it, I can do it. Because sometimes people who really change need somebody else to do it first to empower them. And so I feel like I was able to do that, especially the younger guys. And it's crazy because two of the guys that were in my groups initially, they were both lifers, both in gangs and everything. They're out today and they're doing really good. And they're like like a week ago, a few weeks ago, I spoke at UCLA. I did a workshop there and I brought them with me, and they were able to sit there in the crowd, and I was able to mention them that, like, these two guys were in there going through my first sessions, and like me having a part of the reason why they're out today and they're happy and they're doing good is like what I do it for. And so
Right.
yeah, it's a huge, it's the ripple effect, and it's like it drives me every single day to keep doing it, because I know my impact, like anybody's impact, if you impact one person, you impact many. So that's kind of my mindset going forward.
Yeah. So as it goes forward, and did you sit down in front of a board or a panel or something that approves your release? Is that how it works? That's how the movies show it anyway. Is that kind of how it goes?
Yeah, so yeah, you have to get approved to be released, which is how I was able to get out early, and that's why I know, like, my change and my transformation is the reason why I'm out. It's because I have to go in there and I had to convince them that I'm a changed person, because there's people that go in there and they manipulate people, and and we go in there, and they don't trust people who are incarcerated, so they're very skeptical about letting people out. But I think that when you truly change, it's evident. There's no hiding it. The energy is there, and people feel it. And so I think they knew that, despite my past and all the mistakes I made and all the harm I caused. Um, they saw that the change was real, and it was through my actions. Like the things I did, doing groups, educating myself. Being acknowledged by people in the facility that I was changed. It was obvious, and so yeah, they let me out.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So what's the feeling like when you go through all that? You set in the board and it gets stamped, approved. I'm sure you're elated to get out of there, but is there also some fear of, like, you've been institutionalized for 17 years.
Mhm.
Is everything I've done in here, how am I going to translate that success in here to success outside of the prison walls?
Yeah, I think for me, it's just like there was some feelings of like how I'm to accomplish the dreams that I have. Starting off with nothing, I walked out with $200 in my pocket and had nowhere to go really. And so it to me, but when I really thought about it, and I was like, I have my faith. My faith drove me forward, and my belief in the ability to do amazing things. Because I know, when I reflected back to my old self, like, for me to overcome that was probably the biggest miracle I've ever been in my life, I've ever had. It's like, because it's like he was a completely different person than the man I am today. So I knew it was possible. Like, all the things I envisioned, my ability to adapt in society quickly, my ability to be able to survive and make money, and to have a family and all that. Like, I knew that I could do it. And I think that having that growth mindset, that like really pushed me to get to where I'm at. And so yeah, but and amongst that, there's fear, of course. There's doubt. There's the voices in my head telling me that I can't, but that's the battle. And that's what, how the battle's about. It's like, my whole life's been a battle, and it still is. Even as I change more and more and more, I'm still battling with thoughts of old, with temptations, with the world around me. But that's why I tell people, like, you never finish battling. You just become a stronger person and to be able to handle it. And so that's how I've been doing it.
Yeah. So that brings us to the transition part. I talk a lot about transition from the military in this podcast with my military service members that are in here. And I'm not comparing military and prison, right? That's not a fair comparison for either, I don't think. Like I said, though, before we got on, when I was burning barrels of shit in a walled off gated area in Afghanistan for 6 months at a time, kind of felt like prison occasionally, but it's not the same. But that transition, there's some parallels there. So when you're getting out of the military, you have to deal with the stigma. I'm the infantry guy that deployed 16 times. He must have PTSD. He must be messed up. Fitting in, it's hard for me to stand around with the dads at the football games and talk about, what's going on when we don't have a lot in common. Finding purpose, connecting with that community, finding employment. I see you have tattoos up and down your arms. A lot of military guys are, loaded with tattoos, full sleeve, and they get judged before they sit down and open their mouths. Somebody already has a preconceived judgment of who they are and what they're doing. So there's a lot of parallels there, So I just wondered how, coming from prison, how did you find purpose, and how did you find community, and how did you find employment and things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely parallels, and I didn't learn that till later on. But so in prison, really quick, in prison, most of a lot of the correctional officers were veteran ex-military. They actually were in the military, and then they came to work in corrections. And then the structure of prison is it's ran in you're very it's like you're programmed. You get up at a certain time, you go to chow, you go to yard, it's working out with your group in everybody's working out together. There's a camaraderie there. There's it's just that mindset of when we go to war, this is us, and this is the enemy, and there's the other enemy, but just you're all in an enclosed area of 1,000 men, all from different groups, so to speak. So you're constantly have your head on a swivel. So I transitioned that way of thinking, that creating a routine, that making sure I find a community of positive brothers in my life to help me. I transitioned those things that were once negative in that world to now getting out and doing it in a positive way. So when I got out, I immediately sought out a community. I knew that I could only be so good myself as one man, especially with my past and all these things and my tattoos and all. I already knew that. So I went out and I found a community of men who didn't judge me for my past, which was in the church. So I went to church and I started speaking, and I met great men who actually never judged me, just came and said, how can we help you? And these are men who've never been to prison. Some are ex-military, but different walks of life. And I got part of two different church groups, one called The Program, and which was actually founded by a colonel in the military. We started working out together at 6 a.m. And then now we do stuff together. We do positive things for the community. And the second one was Men's of Fisher, which is another organization of men from different walks of life. So that mindset, knowing that I need a community, was the first thing I did. And they helped me so much to get to where I'm at today, teaching me how to do things that I didn't know how to do, to connecting me with job opportunities, to being there to somebody that I could speak to about the problems and the things I'm going through. So that's one thing. My advice to people out there getting out of whether it's service, prison, or anywhere, you have to find a community of good people. That, and then just as far as knowing, the one thing I truly believe is that education is the great equalizer. It doesn't matter what you look like, where you come from, what your gender is, what tattoo. If you're an educated person and you can communicate properly and you can live up to a set of morals and standards and keep your word and work hard, if you have that way of, people are going to give you an opportunity.
Yeah.
So I truly believe that, and I'm living proof of that. I have no background of anything good when getting out of prison. I have nothing but negative. Like you said, I'm already judged. But the reason why I'm able to actually to excel in life is because when I did get an opportunity, I worked hard. I was always on time. I kept my word, and I educated myself. So that's what I did, and that helped me, and that's still helping me to this day.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with everything you said there. And I just kind of like your perspective on this because I talk about education as well a lot.
mhm,
And I don't necessarily mean formal education going into a college or a university. You can go to a library and get an education. You can read books and write and do things to educate yourself. And I think, you know, an education, a piece of paper, sometimes that's what gets you in the room, right? You might need it
yeah.
to show the other things that you've got, but there are other ways than a university education, right? Do you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. My first education was, like I mentioned, reading 150 books. That was the best education I ever had. Being alone in solitude, reading and reflecting and writing was the
Yep.
best education I ever had. And then I did college too, though. So I agree. Like I believe that there's benefits in both, but there's no excuses. If
Right.
you could still educate yourself even without going to college.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Mm,
And then just the importance of finding your group. I'm just gonna compound on that. It doesn't have to be through the church, right? There's a lot of I'm sure
mm,
there's a lot of atheists in prison. There's a lot in the military.
yeah.
Doesn't mean that you don't need other people, right?
Right.
I believe in God and I believe in the power and everything that you said, but
Mm,
you can go find your group elsewhere, whether it's at the VFW or there's a men's prison group. There's something out there you can find in this day and age to be with people and communicate with people. Because I truly think when you find yourself on an island all alone, nothing good comes of that, right? Nothing usually good comes of that. That's when you revert back to old habits or things that
mhm.
maybe got you in the bad situation you were in the first place.
Yeah.
I was reading some of your stuff, on your website, and I'm going to quote you. Throughout my life, I've encountered numerous obstacles that tested my resilience, determination, and ability to lead both myself and others.
Mhm.
So, what would you just say to anybody that obstacles in front of them right now? What should they do?
Yeah. And that's pretty much everybody in some aspect, right? And it's like, and that's one of the things that I believe in, that one thing we all have in common is that we all have dealt with trauma or will in some way, because trauma is such a huge part of life, and the book I wrote is about trauma. And I just wanted to bring a different outlook on trauma. Like, let's be open about it, that eventually the world we live in, like if you go to the hospital one time to go visit somebody you love, that's a traumatic experience. If you watch a war going on across the world, that's could be a traumatic experience. And so I typically look at everybody dealing with some type of adversity and obstacle. But one of the things I say to people who are dealing with that immediately would be, you have to find a purpose greater than yourself sometimes to move forward through the obstacle.
Yeah,
For me, when I was in solitary confinement, I didn't care about myself. I didn't love myself at first. I didn't do it for myself at first. The reason why every single day I got up in solitary, alone in that place where everything is just repetitive, the reason that got me up in the morning and kept me going wasn't myself at first. It was me thinking about my mom out there, knowing that someday she's going to need somebody to take care of her. Me
yeah,
thinking about that kid out there who may need me to come into his life to give him some advice and help him, or me coming out and making an impact in the world, or so find somebody or something greater than yourself that's going to push you forward through that adversity and obstacle. And eventually in time, you learn to love yourself and you start to do it for yourself, and then that's when
yeah,
you can really start to create great change, because you work on yourself, and the better you are, the better you can be for others. So I would say that, because I work with foster group home sometimes, and the kids there, they don't love themselves. They hate themselves. So I try to help them identify, who do they really care about? Like that
yeah,
mom, that grandma, that person. Do it for them first. So that would be my advice.
yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
agree,
Hmm.
100%. I think sometimes when you're facing a obstacle or
Mhm.
a traumatic experience, you tend to only focus on that. You
Yeah.
put your head down and you look solely at the thing in front of you that's, in your way. And what I tell people, hey, you got to pick your head up and see what's
Mhm.
behind it, and it's the same concept
Yeah.
there. Okay. So you have a psychology degree
Yeah.
that you got while you were in prison.
Mhm.
What a test ground for writing theses and all that stuff. Getting a psychology degree in prison.
Right.
Uh, um, we've discussed it a little bit, but if you elaborate, how has education aided on your
Mhm.
journey? Not only education, formally reading books, but emotional
Yeah.
intelligence, developing self awareness. How has that helped you during your prison transition and now where you're at in life?
Yeah. Like I mentioned before, I was really obsessed with figuring out how I got to that point in my life in solitary. And I knew that when I started to read books, I started to learn about human behavior, and I started to learn about the mind, and I started to learn how the mind controls everything, the way that like everything is just starts there. So I knew I wanted to continue to learn that. And so when I got out of solitary confinement, I immediately looked into how I can get into college. So I started doing research and stuff, and I found that there was a college that I could actually correspond with from prison. They would offer me the same curriculum that they taught at the actual school. I would be able to do it on psychology, and I'm a person who delves into learning and educating myself in things that I feel are connected to my purpose. So I knew if I wanted to become better myself, if I wanted to help others, I needed to learn more about human behavior, and I needed to learn more about the mind. I needed to educate myself. So that's what kind of pushed me into go toward the psychology degree. And then once I got in there and started learning about that, and like you mentioned, emotional intelligence being one of those things, and multiple intelligences and all that, like it gave me knowledge is power, right? It gave me the power to feel like that I can be in control of all these things that are going on. So being aware of what's happening within me when I'm getting angry, being aware that it's there, and then what to do to combat that. Because before I was a person who got angry and I just reacted violently because that's what I was conditioned to be. And so I learned about that it doesn't have to be that way. You can actually change that and control that, and you could adjust and create the life you want. And all that was learned through school and then my own self teaching. So yeah, that for me, and today, I like every day I read and I still learn. Learning it never stops. You have to continue to do it. So I've just developed a relationship with it, and as I continue to grow as a man, I feel that I'm getting more and more um, emotionally intelligent, being more aware of not only myself but others and what they're going through, and that helps me to empathize with them and approach them in a right way. Right, even like in my relationship, being able to understand and know what my girlfriend is going through, to identify that and then see like, okay, what's the best response that I can give to make the situation better, not worse. And so those things like help you to have like this power that feels like you can control the environment around you. And so I truly believe that people who really want to like experience change, learn about emotional intelligence and how you can yield that for yourself and for others.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome stuff.
Mhm.
I want to talk about one thing there that I think is also kind of a veteran parallel. As you said, reacting violently to stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, I deployed to combat 16 times over a 21-year military career. My only thing in my mind for a lot of those years is I just wanted to kill bad guys, right? I just want.
Yeah.
So when I got out of the military, and the so I had a violent, demeanor and
Mm.
mindset, but I also had an outlet for it, right? I got to go to war.
Mm.
And when I get out of the service and now, somebody cuts me off in traffic and I just want to, drive them off the road. And you literally have manifestations. I could go kill this guy right now and I would feel nothing.
Yeah.
And then, you have to walk yourself back and be like, if I said this to a normal person, they would
Yeah.
think I was insane. But it's
Yeah.
just part of the process of trying to
Yeah.
rehumanize yourself. It's difficult. Do you find yourself sometimes having kind of like relapses or moments and you have to catch yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. It's just like I think that's one of the parallels, like you said. Uh, same thing, like if I'm in traffic and somebody cuts me off or somebody does something, I know, like I feel it, like I feel something within me, but going back to the mind, I'm so in control now of my mind, and I know myself emotionally so well that I know what to do to put out the fire. Whereas when I was before, when, my whole, like you said, my mindset was on violence. Like
Yeah.
in prison, the more violent you are, the more you're respected, the more you're feared,
Yeah.
the more people give you that praise and recognition. And then you feel you truly convince yourself like you're doing right. Like
Oh yeah.
me, yeah, like me hurting this person is actually a good thing for us, because the tribe mentality for our tribe, hurting them helps us. And it's like, so that's the thought process. And so it's still deep within there, but, and that's like every day for me. That's why I'm so strict in my routine, because I know that although I'm in control, my goal eventually is to to maybe it never happens, but I feel you could set goals and go after them even if they never happen. I think that's a
Yeah.
part of growing. And for me, I hope that those thoughts and feelings can go away. But I also know it's so deeply rooted through my trauma.
Yeah.
And like how you mentioned, developing PTSD myself from seeing multiple murders in my life, being stabbed and witnessing my best friend kill himself a few feet from me, like all those things, like through my childhood and up, it created something within me that's just I'm fighting with. And
Yeah.
um, but the more I grow and the more that I develop, the less that I feel it has power over me. So yeah, absolutely, I still feel it and I still battle with it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the same thing with the military, especially the special operations community. I mean, if one platoon goes out and does a mission that night, and usually the first question, or at least one of the first questions you always ask is, did you get anybody? Right? Did you get any
Yeah,
tonight? Did you get? And and if they did, they were built up, right? It was one of
yeah,
those things. And now that I'm on the other side of the uniform, I'll find myself in situations where I might be in a disagreement with somebody, and I don't say anything, right? And somebody will be like, why didn't you say something? How do I tell them, like, hey, I know what I'm capable of. It's best for me to just walk away, because if I go down that rabbit hole, it's really hard to come back out of it. If I go into the anger mode, it's hard to come back from it. So I just, I'll try to avoid it at all costs if I can, because I know what it's like. And people don't understand that haven't been in it. They don't get it, right? So
yeah,
you can go from setting on a podcast to ripping somebody's head off in a matter of seconds, and that's just because it's nature. That you've done it for
yeah,
years. It's hard,
yeah.
and that goes into kind of like the power of manifestation and
Mhm,
leadership. What do you think when I say that?
mhm. Yeah, manifestation and leadership. Well, I think a true leader, I'll say first, a true leader inspires people. I think a true leader is like, if you're, if a true leader is just another person that's going toward the same mission. I think that, and it's the same like in a company, right? Like, and I kind of equate that to like my business. Like if I'm the leader of my company, I'm the CEO of my company, it doesn't mean that I'm better than anybody else. It just means that we're all in the same race to the finish line. But I may be a little bit further than the next man, and I'm just showing them the way. But it doesn't mean that they have to take my route to get there. We're just all trying to get there, which is to help people become better versions of themselves. So um, I always I look at it like that, like that a true leader inspires, and he doesn't like dictate. He doesn't try to tell people what to do. He actually inspires them to go do it on their own, even if he's not around. So for me, that's a leader. And that could be a leader in business, in family, in anything. If you have that perspective, and then just manifestation. I think that it's funny because the other day I was talking to a guy and he was talking about manifestation. Such a huge part of manifestation is just writing down what you want. It's simple as that, right? And I know that it's because it's something, and literally through my time in prison, I would write down like what I wanted, where I wanted to be in life, what I was going to do when I got out, my goals, everything I was writing down, and it's all starting to manifest in my life. It's happening, and so I took that practice out here, and I do that every day. Like I'll write something down that I need to do for that day, three different things or whatever I need to do that day, And when you write it down, it just kind of like instills it in your brain, and then you
Yep.
picture it getting accomplished. And then the universe, God, whatever you believe in, it kind of works in your favor sometimes to make those things happen. So I would say, really having a clear understanding of what you want, write it down, and then just work toward it every day. And then you'll be able to manifest what you want. You want a better life. You want to be happier. Write down what happiness lives for you. What does that
Yeah.
mean? What does that look like? And then,
Yeah.
and then every day, just think about that, read that, reflect on that, and start taking small steps each day toward that. That's how you manifest things. And it won't be easy. You'll have challenges and you'll have adversity and you'll have roadblocks. But I think that's the true test of who's going to get it and who's not. But if you know that ahead of time that those are coming, like I knew I was going to probably get killed or stabbed for my change. It's the same thing. I knew it, but I also said I'm not going to let that stop me from doing it.
Right.
I'm going to go through with faith and belief. And so if you take that, you can manifest things in your life. And as a leader, these are things that we should be teaching to people, young people especially. And that's why I work with young people, is because I'm like, they don't teach them this stuff in schools,
Yeah.
especially
No.
where I'm at in Los Angeles, where the school systems are so messed up. It's like, it's really disappointing. So, but for me, that's like, just makes me work harder to do what I do with my
Yeah.
business. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Perfect segue there as we kind of bring the plane in to land here. Uh, how to battle, a little bit more about it, what you do, how people can connect with you.
Yeah. Yeah. So, um, I started How to Battle when I first got out. Well, it started up as a vision. Like I said, I wrote it down. And then I knew I needed help. So what I did was I joined a program, an entrepreneurial program, and I ended up getting into the Drucker School of Management to learn business. And so I took a year and a half program doing that in the process of building my business. And then I started my business, How to Battle, which is coaching and consulting. So started off working with youth in schools, in person and virtually. So we do online sessions with groups of up to 30 kids at a time. They actually jump online from school during school hours. The teacher's in there to facilitate it. And we teach them about real life skills. Like today, we're talking about, well, I actually have a class later today. We're talking about the difference between white collar and blue collar jobs and why they can benefit from both. Right. And then we're getting deeper into that. We talk about finance. We talk about mindset, talk about the importance of fitness and health, things like that. So I do that with the kids. Also working with foster group homes. That's more in-person stuff, but then also nonprofit organizations, helping them get a better understanding of the people that they're going to go serve, which normally is like underserved communities, prison populations, people getting out, and then corporate, like we're doing professional development in corporations, specifically manufacturing, because a lot of the people that work in manufacturing jobs come from like communities that where I came from, and
Yeah.
they go into these positions, and the companies want them to grow and to educate themselves so that they can develop, and a lot of them are kind of closed off to that. So we go in and help with that, and do like training for them. So yeah, just helping people and organizations become better. That's what How to Battle is. Yeah, and I'm also doing speaking, um, going to speak of different places, different organizations, schools, universities, telling my story, but also sharing my workshop on the price, which is the principles in my book, which has been like the foundation of my change and what I help other people to learn when they want to change. So, yeah.
And, is the title of the book? Is it How to Battle?
No, the book is called The Price, and it's
Okay.
the 5 principles to overcome trauma and achieve personal success. I feel a lot of the reason why people don't have success in life is because of their traumatic experiences
Yeah.
having a huge part of keeping them in a state of mind to where they can achieve success. And I believe success is being happy and doing what you ultimately meant to do here on this earth. So that's the book I wrote, and I do like a workshop and I do speaking on that. But yeah, that's my week. And you guys can find me at howtobattle.com, and everything on my website links from there, at How to Battle on Instagram, all that stuff. It's all there.
Okay. Yeah. Awesome. Thanks for sharing. If you missed that, I'll put all those links down in the comments of both the podcast and YouTube. So make sure you check those out. And then the last question I ask everybody that comes on, if you go back and talk to 18-year-old Carlos, what would you tell him?
Yeah. Typically, when I'm asked this question, it's usually younger than 18. So I like that. It's different. I haven't thought about truly what I would tell my 18-year-old self, which is good because the answer I'm going to give is not pre-thought. It's just, this is from the heart. I truly believe that, I would tell my 18-year-old self that the more you hurt people, the more you're going to hurt yourself, and the people that love you. And at 18 years old, I was like at the worst phase of my life. Like I said, I was on my way to prison and already was suicidal, didn't care about life, nobody. Only thing that I know I cared about at that time was like, my mom and the people that my closest, my sister. It wasn't many people, but I was so blinded that I didn't know that the actions of myself and me hurting other people who were like strangers, or I would say back then enemies. I didn't know the true pain and hurt that I was causing on them. Right? It may have crossed my mind, but I never really truly contemplated that. And so I would sit down with my 18-year-old self and explain to him, and maybe even show him the pain and the hurt that he was causing the people that he truly cared about. Because I think if I did that, that young man back then may have made different decisions from then on. Because like I mentioned earlier, I would have found something greater than myself to change for. So yeah, I think that's what I would tell myself.
Yeah. That's I'd like to be a fly on the wall of that conversation, right? Just
Yeah, I know, right?
it goes for all of us. If I only knew then what I know now, right?
Yeah.
Carlos, thanks for coming on the show. Everybody out there watching and listening, I need you to subscribe. I'm almost at that 500 subscriber mark. Help me get across it. Share this. Yeah, Carlos has an amazing story that I know transcends military service, and will definitely resonate with somebody out there that needs to hear it. So thank you for sharing it. Thanks for what you do, and out there, best of luck to you. And we'll catch everybody else on the next episode out here.
Thank you.